right, this episode will be in English and will turn the multi-million security testing market on its head and explain the economics of pen testing in the new threat landscape. We will discuss why pen testing matters, the true cost of pen testing, and the difference between pen testing and what our guest call the next generation pen testing. And that guest who is with us today is Simon Rou, who is a developer and a security consultant from Outpost 24 with over 25 years of experience. He held a webinar with SIG Security earlier this year about this topic. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you.
So, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
So as you mentioned, I've got over 25 years experience in both development and security industry. I started life in an insurance company working in the UK as a QA tester and then a developer, and then graduated from there into an interest in network security and then other sort of application security aspects as well.
So, pen testing, what is it and why is it important?
So typically pen testing is something that organizations do to test whether or not the application or the network, I mean, it doesn't have to be focused on application, but obviously we're talking more about sort of application testing today than necessarily network pen testing. But a customer would, or an organization, would use that to try and figure out from a sort of a hacker's perspective whether or not there is a way into their network. Or they can compromise their application. And it's really important because for an organization to have that view, it gives them a way to understand a couple of things. Is the application itself or the network itself secure? Are there weaknesses, something that can be used to get access into the network and maybe do some damage internally? But also it can be a way to test an organization's defenses and the things that they put around their perimeter, if you like, to try and protect those applications. Could be a web application firewall. It could be some other type of firewall, a next-gen firewall, for instance. Those kind of technologies can also become in scope for understanding, whether or not their defenses are as good as they think they are. So it's really important because it gives that kind of sense of confidence that the application or the network is secure.
Okay, so obviously it's better that we hack ourselves than someone else does it for real.
Absolutely. The last thing you would want is for a malicious hacker to break into a network, potentially steal customer data or other kind of intellectual property that means a lot to the organization, and then just get that out onto the dark web or get that out into the hands of an enemy state nation or something along those lines. So much better for us to do it so that we can do it in a controlled way, that we can work with an organization or the organization does it themselves so that they can control it and understand the impact.
Yeah, okay. This question might come across as a little bit pointless, but I'm going to do it anyway. Should we do pen testing?
Yes. I mean, in a simple answer, absolutely. We shouldn't neglect the outside in view, testing that perimeter, testing those applications, testing that network to make sure that there is no way a third party can break in.
Exactly. So how frequently should an organization do a pen test?
I think that depends on the reasons for doing the pen test. We see organizations maybe doing it once a year. And that might simply because they have to tick a box from a compliance point of view. Or it might be that they need to do it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times a year. It really does depend on what is being tested. If I'm testing a network, for instance, my network access, maybe that's once a year. If I'm testing an application, then that could be more frequent because that application may be changing on a regular basis. I think where we start to see complexity come in is when that application is going through regular sprints. So maybe a sprint every month. If some of the listeners aren't familiar with that phrase, typically we talk about sprint in the development life cycle of the application, and each sprint is designed to push new features to the application. If that's happening on a monthly basis, then there's an argument that pen test should be done monthly. If it's happening on a quarterly basis, quarterly. Really, it's all about when the application changes and what the reasons behind doing the pen testing is.
Okay, so new version, new pen test.
Ideally, yes, because we don't know, especially if we're not doing any other testing of that application prior to that point, we don't necessarily know what could have been introduced in that new version of the software or that new version of the application. We may have used a vulnerable component and not realized it. And so what we wouldn't want is for that vulnerable component to be available for somebody to target, to compromise over a 6-month period, because we only do 2 pen tests a year.
You actually talk about Tickbox Compliance in your webinars. Could you please explain?
Yeah, so this is one we see quite often. And so in my mind, when I talk to organizations, Tickbox Compliance is very much, I have an audit requirement, and my audit requirement says this application must be pen tested once a year or twice a year. I think the current PCI standard is technically 4 times a year. I think that's where it's at the moment. It maybe more, maybe less. But often it's that kind of thing. It's driven by an external factor, or perhaps an internal auditing team that simply says you've got to pen test this. And that's the only reason they're doing it, is because in order to satisfy that requirement, PCI or an internal audit, they do the pen test. They have their rubber stamp that says, yep, you've done the test, you've addressed the findings, great. There's no real thought behind why they're doing it, and there's obviously no thought around the cadence of that application development to actually tie it all together. They do the minimum that they need to, when they need to get a pass in something.
That makes sense. All right, so the economics. What do customers think they pay for, really?
So this is it's an interesting topic, and often when we talk to customers, organizations, I shouldn't call them customers really, should I? Organizations. I've got my work head on too much. When we talk to organizations about pen testing, the thing that often comes out is, a day rate, right? I expect my pen test to cost $800 or €800 or £800 a day. And that's what I'm used to paying. And typically I'll ask them to do a 5-day test. And so you do the quick mental math and you kind of go, well, that's £4,000 or €4,000 or whatever currency we're talking about. And that's what the customer thinks they're paying for. They kind of get focused on this. Yeah, it's a 10-day test. It's €8,000. And they won't budge from that. And then when they look at other suppliers, they measure it against what they expect to happen, that 8 days of testing or 10 days of testing at €8,000 total. And then if you come in under, you might get the job. If you come in over, they might say, yeah, you're too expensive. I can get it for £150 a day less. That's kind of where this all kind of started from. And that's what a lot of customers think their pen test is costing them.
Okay, I totally get it. I'm into this business myself, so I can absolutely. You're totally right there. I can say you can say there is a difference between the upfront costs and the after test costs, so to speak.
Yeah, there is, and it's costs that people forget about. When I talk about this kind of economics of a pen test, the upfront costs are a little bit. I suppose they're things that you would do anyway, but still they influence the actual cost of that test. So what we're kind of talking about is, the time it takes you as an individual. You need to do a pen test, and maybe the organization's requirement is that you have to go to tender for every kind of pen test. You've got to get 3 quotes out, so you've got to spend time then writing out the thing that you want an organization that you're going to invite to tender or invite to quote, you want them to quote on. So you spend maybe a couple of days writing a nice kind of report. Maybe you've got a template, maybe you rehash the old one, but it still takes, it takes you time. And your time is money. And that time that you're spending on that is something that you could be doing elsewhere. You could be, from a security point of view, you could be assessing other security needs or incidents or requirements. And so typically, we talk about a couple of days kind of writing that tender. Then you'll kind of maybe you do it yourself, or maybe the requirement is that all of these kind of tenders or these requests for quotes have to go through the finance department. So you get the finance department, they go out, they pick their top 3 people that they like to use, or they use the 3 that you've provided, but they spend time sending that out, answering questions, negotiating with the respondees, and that might take 4 or 5 days of time. And again, once you've kind of got to finalizing that with an individual, there's generally going to be some to-in and fro-in. The scope is this. Are you sure this is what you want to do? What about these things? You don't seem to have covered these. Or is this the only part of the application you want testing? What about all this kind of stuff? Is this relevant? And then you sort of end up in that, well, when would you like to start? I'd like to start on Monday. We can't do Monday. We can do 4 weeks time. We can't do 4 weeks time. It's too late. And so you end up this kind of to-in and fro-in. And, ultimately, when we look at this, you could end up spending 6, 7, 8, 9 days of extra time just before you've even got to the point where you've started that pen test. And when we talk about, in the, as you mentioned, the webinar that I delivered, we kind of allocate a day rate. Typical day rate, I think in the US when we put this together, was around $500 cost for an individual per day, typically in an organization. And it all adds up. Your 8 to 10 days of time that you think you're paying for a pen test suddenly becomes an extra 9 or 10 days, and that kind of starts to double the cost.
Mm-hmm. So we are talking about the true cost of a pen test, so to speak.
Absolutely, yeah. The things that we take for granted because it's what we do in our day-to-day jobs and our day-to-day work, but we don't associate it with actually having an impact on that pen test cost. But the reality it does. It costs us more time to get to a point where we can start a pen test.
You could say then that the customers risk don't getting what they paid for, right?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, absolutely. And it that comes more in the after costs, because we just talked there about the upfront costs. There's still more cost to think about, and that is the impact of getting that test. We think about as we've just kind of highlighted, you maybe add your 10-day pen test might now have taken you 15 to 19 days to get ready and deliver, but after test costs can be just as costly, and things that we don't think about. When we talk about a 10-day pen test, there's usually a point at the end of that test where the tester will stop testing, they'll go away, they'll write a report, and then they'll hand that report over to you. And that might take a day out of that 10 days of testing. It might take 2 days out of that 10 days of testing. It depends, again, how you negotiate the contract, obviously, but in a lot of instances, we see a 10-day test in reality becoming an 8 or 9 day test. Then there's the report itself. I get that report, I have to review that report and to try and understand what has been found. How relevant is it to my organization and to my application? Are there any false positives in there? Things that I don't really care about? Things that I can risk accept? That could, again, depending on the size of that report, it could take a day, it could take 2 or 3 days. You then think about remediating those. How do I get that into the hands of the people that will actually fix it? If it's an application, we've got to get it into the development hands. And typically security development are 2 separate entities, 2 separate organizations. And unless you're practicing DevSecOps, And to be fair, even if you are practicing DevSecOps, the issue of getting those findings into the backlog, somebody's got to spend some time creating those issues, because you've got a paper report or a PDF report from the company that's done the pen test. I've got to turn that into something actionable. And then at the end of that, we're thinking about remediation. How do I remediate all this? What is the impact on the sprint that we're performing for that application? If we're not doing sprint, we're doing traditional kind of waterfall development. What is the impact of fixing all those things? Which ones do I start with? Which ones do I accept and maybe push down the line? So when we think about those costs for the pen test, it adds even more time. And so typically, we see a typical sort of 10-day pen test in reality costs an organization anywhere between 15 and 20 extra days of, another 15 to 20 extra days of effort to actually get that pen test through the books. And then to kind of answer your question, because I've kind of dragged on a little bit there, is the value that it delivers. As I kind of alluded, you don't always get that 10 days of time. Things happen. The time I've spent in the industry, I've walked on site to help an organization with a task to find that the organization is not ready. So if you've asked the pen testing company to start on Monday, and it's to coincide with a go live of an application, and then the week before the developers find something that doesn't work or needs completely fixing, your pen test team might arrive and be told they can't do anything because we're not ready, and we'll be ready in 2 days' time. That impacts those 10 days. It may be that there's no potential time for the pen testers to come back. They're too busy. So, you've got a choice. Do I start in 2 days' time and accept that I've lost 2 days of effort? Or do I postpone the test for another month or 2 months because they're too busy? Or do I start the process again and go and find another organization to do it? Either way, we're losing time. The other thing that can happen is impact to the actual application. The pen testers, best will in the world, don't set out to try and break things. But we've seen, again, instances of our own pen testing teams where we've physically broken an application. It's a production application. It has an impact on the organization. The business complains. That application needs to be restarted. And then we need to sit down with the testers to say, change of scope. That costs us half a day. It costs us another day. So ultimately, when we factor all this in, that 10 days of testing that you think you've got could end up actually being 7 days, 6 days, due to all these different delays. And that's kind of the impact. When, we think about a day rate, it's not always what you get for all of those kind of potential pitfalls that can hit you.
Yeah, I can attest to most of those problems. It does happen indeed. So, next-gen pen testing. That is something you spoke about. What's that about?
So next gen, I think it's a phrase that a lot of vendors like to use to try and convey that it's something new, something different. And in reality, what we've designed here at Outpost 24 is very different. Certainly a different approach that's been led by a lot of consultation with our customers. And that's the key thing. It's not something that we kind of plucked out of the air and thought would be cool and give it that next gen tag. It's very much changing the way we approach doing pen testing and doing business with our customers. And, we liken it to Netflix.
Netflix, okay. That's some kind of pen test. You click here and you select... I'm sorry, I'm not getting it.
Yeah, so Netflix, when you think about Netflix, right, so the way we consume TV or television, the way we consume programs on sort of terrestrial TV or maybe some kind of satellite TV was very much at the at the I'm trying to think of the right phrase here, but it was kind of at the pleasure of the television company, right? So if we wanted to watch our favorite TV program, I grew up, in my early 20s, in the 90s, loving the X-Files. And in the UK, it was every Thursday night at 10 o'clock in the evening. And we had to sit and wait every week for that next episode, and we'd get excited and we'd watch it, and you'd finish and you'd be like, oh, it's 7 days now before I could get the next episode and find out how the story moves on. And then along came Netflix, and they really changed the way people consumed television. And to the point of, we can break this down to a very simple model. There is a fixed price, right? It's not going to cost me more or less. It's just a simple price per month. And in that, I can consume as much as I like. It's on demand. It's flexible. It meets my needs. Netflix and other streaming platforms now. So, the usual suspects, Disney Plus, you've got Amazon Prime. They're all the same thing. They mold themselves and fit themselves around my timetable, not around their timetable. It's always on, it's instant. It's on demand, instant. I can go to Netflix and I can watch the next episode. If I really want to, I can consume an entire series in the 12 hours that it might take to play. It's I'd say an excellent streaming experience. That's all real down to our bandwidth and our broadband. But essentially, if you think about it from a customer experience, if our means of delivery is good enough, then we enjoy the service that we get. Often when I deliver this presentation in front of a live audience, I'll often ask the question, hands up, how many people have actually had to get in touch with the customer service team of their streaming TV service? You might get one or two, but in audiences of 30, 40, 50 people, one or two people putting their hand up is, it's a real testimony to the service that we get from those from those things. And that's kind of what we liken to a sort of a next gen pen test model. If you take the way Netflix came out of nowhere, really shook up the way we consume television and we consume those kind of programs, and then you think about it from a pen testing point of view, how do I embrace that kind of model? Fixed price. None of this negotiating day rate. I want a 10-day, I want a 5-day, I want a 15-day. You fix the price of the test, and you also fix the length of that test. So you say, look, for this price, you'll get 30 days of our testing team's attention. And that gives you time to test an application and to be able to ask questions, talk to the analysts, understand those findings. You can consume those findings at your leisure. The other aspect is that on-demand and flexibility of the sort of the Netflix streaming model is the second part of what we think is a next-gen pen test. Allowing the customer to tell you as the deliverer when they want that test to happen, and building in a process that says, we will guarantee that we'll start that test, maybe not on the day you want it to happen, but if you give us enough notice, we'll guarantee that we can start it on the day you want it to happen. And so we created this concept of an on-demand test. If the customer gives us 5 days notice maximum, we can generally accommodate the start date that they want. None of this, I can't do it for 3 weeks, I can't do it for 6 weeks. We do our best to accommodate on that day. And if we can't, then we have an honest and open conversation with the customer and set an expectation. Our goal, generally speaking, though, is to start when you want us to start. The concept of instant access, getting an episode of television when you want it as soon as it's available, is the way that we deliver the results to the customer. As soon as the first thing is found, we will deliver that to the customer through a UI. Customers no longer waiting for the test to finish. They're no longer waiting for a report to be written. They see all of the things that they need to address a finding in a UI once it's been found and once we've pushed it. So a test can be ongoing. A test could be a 10-day test, and on day 2, we could push 6 findings. The customer can immediately start to work on them.
All right, okay, I get this now. It's more like a formalized process, and so. Because what I think about pen tests, such as they are when we are asked to do them, we kind of do most of this already, as we kind of say it like, we can start as soon as possible, and all of that. But I think that feels a bit new there. That's that you have some kind of portal there, as you said, where you can push the findings as they come. Just one thing here, I generally, personally, this is a personal taste, I guess, don't want to tell the customers about the findings until it's done, because they have a tendency of starting to, changing the environment on the fly, which kind of messes up the tests.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. And we kind of flip that slightly differently. We look at that differently, and actually we welcome the customers to do that. Part of the process that we deliver is the ability to retest things. So once the customer has said, once we push that finding, the customer sees it and they say, look, I fixed it. Or my dev team have told me they fixed it and we've put that into live. Can you retest? And the team will then take a look at that finding and they'll retest to see whether or not it's been fixed. It's part of the service that we deliver here is this concept of next gen. Being able to ask the tester a question, I don't understand why this finding exists, and then tell them, my guys have fixed it, can you validate it? We kind of look at it slightly differently, but it's an interesting point.
Yeah, but that seems to be I like the idea of this formalization, because previously I felt here in Sweden that pen testing has been very much a negotiation, which makes it harder to kind of make it a regular thing. Like, as you said, new version, new pen test. So if you release a new version every month, you have to go through this negotiation phase. So your idea with the next gen pen testing would simply start faster, like, clicking on that Netflix video.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's kind of like why we use that Netflix analogy. Really, is that's the whole thing. It's an on-demand test. You tell us when you want to test. You've already paid for a bunch of these, and we just test it. And you get your results, you work on them, and we can often fit to a customer's sprint cadence quite easily. Certainly around the month, the monthly sprints are easier. Weekly sprints are a lot harder to do, but nonetheless, we try our best.
Yeah, there is a limitation. I mean, such things have to be done. You have to take its time, I guess. Well, Simon, very much thank you for appearing on the show here. This is IT-Säkerhetspodden, a Swedish IT security podcast. My name is Eric, and this has been an episode done in cooperation with Outpost 24 and SIG Security. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.